It's easy to dismiss a controlling boss or a work colleague as merely as tough or high-performing or arrogant, sometimes, especially in high-pressure environments like the tech or the finance, law, health. But when that behavior crosses that and turns into egocentric manipulation, lack of empathy, grandiosity, public shaming, credit stealing, and emotional manipulation, you may unknowingly be working with someone with narcissistic disorder. Welcome to Coffee Talks. In this episode, we will navigate narcissism at work. It's quite the topic at this time, but what it looks like and what it feels like, it's important that we're clear before we jump into conclusions. I'd love to welcome my guest today. Today we have Zoe Parsons. Zoe is a multi-award-winning domestic and narcissistic abuse recovery coach, counselor, and Mackenzie friend. She empowers survivors to heal from abuse and reclaim confidence. We also have Liz Hayde-Reeve. Liz has spent 30 years working in the charity sector as a director, volunteer and trustee, and she's now dwelling into being a writer and a broadcaster. And then we have Nick Whitehouse. Nick is a somatic trauma-informed coach and trainer, solution-focused hypnotherapist. It is so great to have you guys today with me. So let's kickstart this conversation. Let's start with the word itself. What is narcissism and how does it actually show up in the workplace? I wonder if, Zoe, you can answer that.
Yeah, sure. I think when we think of narcissist, we probably think of it in a intimate relationship. Statistically, 1 in 8 people are narcissists, so we are going to encounter one in our workplace. And it's more than just selfish behavior. It's someone who's controlling, who wants to dominate, who needs power, and is going to gain those things by making you feel that you're failing, that you're not performing properly within your role.
So I'm aware that most people don't realize they're working with a narcissist. They are just quite doubtful with what they see. Or they see certain behaviors in their bosses or their partners or their colleagues, and they cannot put a finger on it and understand what the behavior relates to. So what are the early warning signs and how do we know if we are working with a narcissist? Nick, I don't know if you want to shed some light.
Listening to that question, the first thing I would think is, and I would bow to the knowledge of my other guests, start off with the love bombing element, which is that sort of idealization. It's starting off by pulling you in by appealing to you as being the best employee ever known to anybody, slowly drawing you into something that might be a sort of a cycle of abuse. Does that sound familiar, ladies?
Yes, definitely. I would agree with you there. It's all about making you feel safe in their company before they're going to start the devaluation phase, where they're going to start maybe taking credit for your work, dumping extra work on you, all these types of red flags of behavior I would expect to be seeing.
So that's really clear. So we start with the love bombing, and then what's the experience of being under love bombing? I don't know, Lizzie, if you want to share that. What's that experience? Can you get out of that? Do you fall for it?
I think my experience when I was working with I had a boss who was clearly a narcissist. I think one of the significant things that I noticed about the behavior was that there was definitely an attempt to divide and rule. So there was an attempt to set up either small groups, excluding 1 or 2 people, or excluding you from a group. But that sense of bewilderment that you feel when somebody begins to exhibit that kind of behavior is something that I recall very clearly.
At that point, do you think it's out of the ordinary? It's like something you've never... It feels over the top when you first get that love bombing experience.
I think that's true. It's definitely quite destabilizing. It's quite a bizarre feeling. So if you're being subjected to the love bombing, I think it feels uncomfortable anyway. I mean, you might briefly at the beginning think, oh, this is good, we're going to get on really well. But actually, very quickly, you start to feel, I feel uncomfortable in this relationship. And then the notion of trying to split the team into little factions, I think is really disturbing.
So for those that are listening, how would they know if they are with a narcissist? Because feelings like adulation and, as you were saying, the love bombing, they last only a brief period of time. Once the prey has, fallen, when you become that prey and you no longer have access to discerning what's right and wrong, and you start doubting yourself. How do you know if your boss or your colleague is doing that to you when all of a sudden, from one day to the other, the behavior changes?
I think a couple things that's going to help you identify is the intensity. Anything that is generally really intense, like they seem to always want to talk with you, grab a coffee with you, they always seem to be helping you, offering support, offering guidance. It might look like they've really got your back, but it's very intense. And the other thing is, I would expect it to all be in a very short space of time. So by the time you're kind of on day 2 of your job and you haven't had a chance to really meet anyone, they'll be showing you around. They'll be really holding your hand and making you feel cared for.
And does it actually help that they are very good under pressure? They operate very confidently under pressure. Perhaps having that belief that they're great at what they do. But then when you start looking into it, you realize that actually they don't do much. They're just taking your ideas and using them as theirs.
My experience of that is that there is some of that, but more significantly, that person designs every activity to make themselves shine, make themselves look good, make themselves be the center of attention, make themselves be the person who has all the answers. So I think it's very quickly becomes obvious that it's a very uneven relationship.
I would also throw into the mix that I would see behaviours that would suggest a disorganized attachment style. If that makes sense. That you've got an anxious attachment style from the individual who almost wants to have a connection emotionally in the very deep way with you, but then pulls away and becomes very avoidant very quickly and almost swings from one to the other. Does that sound familiar, Zoe or Lizzie?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because when you think about that hot, cold, on-off behavior, really what we're talking is the very foundational manipulation that we have to experience if we're going to become trauma bonded. So trauma bond isn't just something that happens in a relationship. Maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a sibling, or, on a personal level. It also happens with anyone. And it happens because one day we're on an emotional high and then we're on an emotional low. We're up, we're down, they're hot, they're cold, we're pleasing them, they're dissatisfied. And during all that time, our body is flooding with endorphins and cortisol, happy chemicals, negative chemicals, and we get addicted to it. And then we look to them to become our source of praise or our high, as it were.
I was interesting, it might come up later, but in talking about the chemicals and the biology there, Zoe, I was chatting to a survivor from a narcissistic relationship a couple of days ago, and it's amazing how the stress hormones, the impact it has on things like the hippocampus that can inhibit your memory recall, and so that gaslighting happens, and then you start to believe it because actually it's affecting your brain chemistry so that your memory is affected, and so you get caught up in that and it doubles down and you start believing in the prophecy. So it's important to catch it early.
So thank you for that, guys. So Nick, you just mentioned the word gaslighting, and it's quite popular at the moment. It's being used around a lot on social media. How does a narcissist gaslight their colleagues, and what's the impact on that? What's the impact on the culture of the company? What's the impact within the teams and the individual himself?
I would say that if you're being gaslighted in a workplace, again, your perception of reality is undermined. Your judgment is undermined. So you might have a call to make. So I'm a former head teacher, so I can imagine if, for example, a colleague has had to make an important judgment call about maybe a safeguarding incident or something like that. If you are undermined and questioned on that, you will start to doubt your perception of what's the right call to make without their say-so, without their influence in it. Would that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think it tints the perception of reality. What do we know as to be real? And we start dwelling into, is this really happening? Am I making this up? Yeah, am I, so you start doubting yourself inside that relationship. Zoe, something you'd like to add?
I think you're probably going to see this type of behavior in, you need to submit or complete a piece of work, and they say, I've already told you the deadline, you've missed the deadline, and you didn't have that conversation about the deadline, but they're so strong and convinced that, yes, we had this conversation, I told you, that you actually start to doubt yourself, and you're like, well, did we? Was it? Maybe I forgot, maybe I wasn't paying attention. And that is the very classic example of gaslighting, because it's all designed, gaslighting is designed to undermine your confidence, to make you stop feeling confident in your ability, because when you don't trust yourself and you're not confident in yourself, what you do is you become more dependent on the person and more reliant on them. So what will happen is you start checking in, you start asking questions, you start going, well, what do you think about this? And really what you're doing is you're giving them more power and more control.
And sorry, Liz, you wanted to say something.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree with that, because actually I think gaslighting is the thief of self-confidence and the bringer of self-doubt. So what it does is it undermines your trust in your own ability and your own skills and your own opinions, really, and brings about with it something that undermines your normal way of working and your normal way of behaving.
Absolutely. So what happens to the culture of the organization if the narcissist is left unchecked? And what can HR do? I mean, Nick, let's start with you. What would you say if you have a narcissistic, in your experience as headmaster as well, putting the other hat on, if you had one of the key people in the school being a narcissist?
Well, I think it would be very, sorry to interrupt you there. I would say that, first of all, it leads to a culture within the organization that becomes incredibly toxic. It loses its ability to be dynamic and people to be able to problem solve, because people aren't operating from a centered, sort of grounded position in the prefrontal cortex. Ultimately, you have a very fragile system where there's a high likelihood that people are going to go off ill or leave very quickly, potentially. And so you never get a sense of positive direction or a sense of stability within an organization. So I think ultimately it's a self-defeating culture to have in a school, especially. In wider industry, I imagine it's very similar.
I would say it is absolutely very similar, and when a team is undermined in that way, they can't function properly as a team. Their workplace is divided. Some people feel much more at risk in terms of their job. People are frightened to express their opinions. It just develops a toxic culture.
Yeah, and what happens to your personal development when you are under that relationship where you think, well, that was my idea. I said that. Now he or she is coming forward, pretending that the idea is theirs. What does that do to you and your own personal confidence and trust in yourself?
I think in that situation, it depends on how well you are, how self-confident you feel, because some people who have been undermined over a long period may well just implode at that point. They just won't try. But other people may want to try fighting back and may stand up for themselves. And that can have varying consequences as well.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it's difficult if you've identified that you're working with someone who's displaying narcissistic behavior, because essentially I think you mentioned earlier, what can HR do? I think HR, the reality is HR, their hands are very tied with what they can do. It's all going to depend on how you've documented the abuse. And I mean, one thing we have to be careful of is, narcissism is a clinical diagnosis.
Right.
We cannot be going to HR saying, a colleague, our boss is a narcissist. Because straight away, that is going to put you on the back foot because you're essentially slandering someone.
Well, of course, there's then you have to prove
exactly
what you're saying, and unless you have a psychiatric background, that's not the way forward. But is there a way that you can manage, and the word manage, a narcissist, or is the only solution to get out? What do? Your boss is a narcissist, you're there in that scenario, you go into those private meetings and he's slamming you and ripping you apart, and then takes your ideas and uses them in a meeting to highlight how great they are. You are under that scenario. Is there a way to manage the narcissist? Do you call the bluff, or what do you do? Do you just leave?
You leave, because actually I can't think of a single incident where across my 30-odd year career where people have been put in that situation, it's ever turned completely around. I mean, you can maybe manage it for a bit, if you've got a particular project on, you can maybe find a way of working to get that project fulfilled. But if that person is your boss, or if that person is crucial to ensuring that they work with you in a way that is beneficial to both you and the organization, that I don't know. I mean, I bow to the opinions of the professionals on this call, but I don't think those people change.
I agree with you. They don't change. And I think that the main thing that you need to remember is you need to manage your expectations. So when you speak about managing a narcissist, you're not managing a narcissist, but you are managing your expectations as to what you think the outcome is going to be. So if you're expecting fairness, accountability, any form of understanding, justice, visibility, you're not going to get it. And you need to manage those expectations, because when we don't manage expectations, this is where we have feeling, because an unmanaged expectation is going to make us feel angry, frustrated, stuck, whatever is going to bring along a negative emotion, and then we will react in a business setting in an emotional way.
Yeah, I was just going to say that if you are fortunate enough to be in an environment, and if certainly someone is listening and they have the opportunity to reach out to an employee assistance program or an EAP and have access to maybe talk about their experiences, because there might be a point where you're thinking, is this a narcissistic boss, or is it something else, or I'm not quite sure.
Me, that's the first reaction. Is it me? Am I the one doing this?
There is no issue with contacting that free advice line and talking with someone that might help you, even from a pure coaching perspective.
So I would suggest that there's, if you're lucky enough to have access to maybe an employee assistance program or an EAP, it might be an opportunity where you're questioning this narcissistic boss or something else, or is it perhaps me? And it might give you an opportunity just to talk out your concerns, be able to reflect on what your next steps may be, and that is a possibility. Or if you've got a good relationship with a positive relationship with possibly a professional body or your union. So certainly if I used to be a head teacher, you might want to reach out and speak to the NEU or other union or something like that. They might be able to give you some completely neutral advice and a sounding board that might help you consider what the facts are in front of you, perhaps in a different way.
So moving forward, you are in that situation, you're suffered this fragmented or disjointed relationship for years or for a long period of time. What does that do to you as a co-worker, partner? What does that do to your self-esteem, to your personal confidence, even to your mental health? Zoe, perhaps you can shed some light.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point that you're making, because when we think about what Lizzie said, there's a fine balance between staying and thinking we can manage the situation, we're fine, to recognizing that actually this is toxic, this is dangerous to our mental and physical health, and that we actually need to get out before we're so worn down by everything that we don't actually have the energy or the confidence to be able to get out, because we think, wow, I can't even do this job. How can I apply and get something else? And then you feel stuck.
Liz, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think one of the things that can be helpful in that situation is that, particularly in my world, where you perhaps haven't got the kind of union around you or the kind of structure where perhaps if you're in teaching or something like that, there's a bit more of a structure. When you feel a bit out on your own, I think one of the best things you can do is to get yourself a coach, because they're very helpful. Coaches can be very helpful at giving you a better perspective on the situation that you're in.
Thank you for just putting my banner with my details. I appreciate that. Nick, I'm sure you can take some as well.
I mean,
Sorry, I have a question I like that it came about in sessions, funny enough, many times, is, do narcissists target certain people? How do you become a target if you do become a target? Or how do they choose their prey or someone where they can easily manipulate?
I come from a more lay perspective, and other two speakers have got a much more kind of professional take on this. But I think that the fact that narcissists can smell out vulnerability is where it all starts. So I think they're looking to pick off people, pick off the easy people first.
I would probably second that. I would say that you're particularly vulnerable if you have an anxious attachment style. If maybe your background and your previous trauma or maybe your childhood or something like that has meant that you are particularly anxious and you're looking for cues in your environment and in your relationships that validate you. It means that you are probably particularly vulnerable to this kind of relationship. Zoe, do you think that might be accurate?
Yes, I totally agree with you. I think we all have needs and we have unmet needs, as you say, Nick, from previous relationships, childhood. And the thing is with abusive, narcissistic, toxic people is they're very observant of humans. So they will be able to spot an unmet needs in you as an individual so they can manipulate it. And it goes back to the beginning. They identify that unmet need and they will love bomb you, and you will feel, this person's amazing. They've met my needs. So if you've had a tricky previous, job and you're going into another job and you're not feeling confident in your ability, that unmet need, that lack of confidence, that lack of self-esteem, they will take that and they will use it and then they will flip it. And the thing is with that is because they have met your need in the beginning, you will keep on going back to them because you will want to know, why aren't you meeting my need anymore? What have I done? What has changed? What do I need to do to get back to that original dynamic?
So that creates the loop of constant trying to reach or be pleased by them, and constantly try to adulate and incentivize that relationship. What I would say to add to that, in part of my preparation for the call, there's also you're chosen as a prey, as you say, Zoe. You're chosen because you get caught on, they get a woof of your vulnerabilities, but also there's something you provide to them in that relationship. So you're chosen because you are of value, right? It's not random that you're in that situation. You are providing high value, which is beneficial for the narcissist, because ultimately, why would someone become a narcissist? So what are, perhaps we need to go a little bit deeper and say, how do you become a narcissist? Why do certain people, become narcissists? Perhaps you can clarify that, Zoe.
Yeah, I mean, generally with narcissistic behavior or narcissist, it's how the brain has developed. So it's something that happens in childhood. It's normally one of two ways. That person has experienced trauma or they've been spoiled. And when I say spoil, I mean they've not had consistent boundaries. They've not been consistently told no. They've learned to triangulate and manipulate their parents to be able to get what they want. I mean, we see it, go shopping, a child is on the floor throwing a tantrum, the parent doesn't know what to do, so they just walk away and they leave the child because it's easier to not deal with it than to try and wrangle that child or, I don't know, do whatever you do. But what that child is learning is that they could behave in a really outrageous way and it gets them what they want. So their brain is developing and rewiring in a certain way, and these behaviors will still manifest when they become adults. It's all about manipulating to get what they want.
Yeah, I get that. They do very good spies. Yeah, I'm sure. So I am interested in leaving some hope so that we go home and if people are listening, they listen from woes. What can I do? Right, I'm trapped in that situation. You know, my partner, my business partner is a narcissist and I've been suffering this all along. Now what? If that's the poison, what's my antidote? How do I go back to regaining my self-confidence? How do I go back to having a healthy lifestyle and re-engaging in relationships, in business relationships that are healthy? How can I rejoin teams in a healthy way so that I trust again that I can contribute to those teams? Lizzie, I don't know if you have something you can add in that. I love your smile.
Well, I think that the situation is the first step is to recognize that you have been in that kind of relationship, because so often you make yourself wrong, there's a lot of self-doubt, there's all the things that we talked about. So the big first step is to recognize actually that it isn't you, you're okay, you've got plenty to contribute. And so recognition is key. I've had relationships where I've had a narcissistic employer, and I've had personal relationships where I've had, a narcissistic relationship. And for me, it's about understanding that this is what you're in. And that's very, very difficult because you spend a lot of time going, oh, perhaps I did that wrong, or I should misjudge that. You go back and you go over it and you fret with it and you worry and you try and find the answers. But when you actually get that actually this is a narcissistic situation, for me, I read a book. This is on a personal level rather than on a business level. But I bought a book in the airport once called When Your Lover is a Liar. And I read the first couple of pages and it was like the scales fell off my eyes. You know, it was just mind-blowing that I was reading this list of characteristics and they completely told the story of the relationship that had been causing me the problem. So I think that being supported to see the reality of the situation is the first thing. That's the first step to healing. And once you've done that, then you can start to rebuild. And whether that's through bringing more trusted relationships in and more nurturing relationships into your workplace, or whether it's having a coach or a special or somebody on the team who you feel you can confide in. But it's then about thinking about how you can build that path of healing, which when you can put a little bit of space between you and that toxic relationship and start to think in a more logical and confident way, I think that's when it all starts to turn.
Yeah, what comes to mind is grounded. When you ground yourself and the healing begins. Nick, something you'd like to add to that?
I was just going to say that thank you, Lizzie, that what strikes me is the first thing you need to find is that psychologically safe space. Give yourself some space for reflection and make a plan. Because what you need to be able to do is plan in a place where you can't make a plan where you're in a place where you're activated, where your sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive. So when the adrenaline's going, you're not going to be able to make a plan. So you need to either, that is through talking with a coach or a friend you trust or whatever it is, to be able to reach out and find that acute space and then make those acute decisions that might be you need to whistleblow, or you might need to speak to the police, or whatever it is your next steps are. And then moving into the medium and longer term, then it's working through the trauma that's happened to you and allowing your nervous system to re-regulate itself and the chemistry coming back to normal, so that you can, maybe some long-term physiological symptoms can start to reset themselves. But you've got that first step is finding that psychological safe space. I don't know, Zoe, would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And I think while you're understanding and working through, is this a narcissist? What do I do? The other thing you definitely need to be doing is documenting everything. So stop communicating with them verbally. Stop having that informal catch up at the coffee machine. If you do, you go back and you say, hey, thanks for the quick chat. Just want to confirm this is what we discussed, and you send it in an email. You need to start documenting everything. That is for your own protection, because if they feel that they've lost control, they are going to escalate, which puts you at risk. And if they're in a higher position than you, the likelihood is you're the one that's going to be being called up into HR, or being put on a PIT, or some kind of performance review where you're not doing what you need to be doing. So you must document everything, because that protects you. And it also acts as a means to counteract gaslighting, because you've got it written as evidence. Nick, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was just saying the two things that was on the tip of my tongue before it all slips away is, first of all, and see what you folks think about this, that the first of all is avoid one-to-one meetings. And if you do, make sure that you agree the notes after the session. So saying, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed. If you can, have a third person in the room, or try and create it so there's a third person.
Yeah.
Or someone who is just going to be a neutral person who's going to take notes.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be done in a way that appears to be abrupt or confrontational, but it might be just be really good practice just to have someone who's keeping a note of what's been discussed.
Sorry, Nick. I don't know whether this is legal, but is it possible to just go into any of those meetings where you're worried about all of that, where you might say, I'm not trying to do it sneakily, but actually be upfront about it and just say, I'm just going to record the meeting just so that I can refer back to it later. And just take your phone in and record the meeting.
That's not legal in all scenarios. In some meetings, you're allowed to do that. Some people feel uncomfortable about it. I mean, in fact, in today's scenario, we have AI companions that join the meetings and are note takers. So it's easier to register what happens in those meetings. It's in those informal situations where the relationship has to have zero contact to start the recovery. So if you have been in that situation, as you all have beautifully contributed, the first step I would say is the self-awareness. Yeah. And then I would say it's the contact zero. Just withdraw yourself from those situations where you're being undermined and you're being made to fight or flight, and your nervous system becomes reactivated. But also, I know, Nick, you do some of your sessions in the woods and in open spaces where people get in contact with nature. What's the impact of being in nature, or what can nature do to make us feel more safe and grounded in this scenario? Okay,
so there's lots of things there. First of all, there is actually a form of therapy which is solution-focused walking therapy, and actually the nature itself, the trees give out, I think it's called photoscenes, and those actually are shown to improve your cognitive state. But equally, certainly as a man who likes to talk to men about their mental health, being outside and maybe walking side by side is a better way of having a conversation than sitting face to face with somebody. And you've probably seen, probably near to you, there might be men's walking groups and things like that are talking about their mental health. And sometimes just by being outside and getting the fresh air and doing something means there's less of a barrier about talking about something. That's something I've certainly used to my benefit talking about with men about their mental health.
And women, any individual that feels like they have to go outside and be, I'll say it again, ground themselves inside that awareness list. And on that note, I just have one last question, and that is, what do you think narcissists fear the most?
I'd probably say they fear being exposed.
Say some more about that.
So, I mean, everything they do is about creating the perfect mask in how they present themselves to people. So what you're seeing is one side, but the people who are doing the work are seeing another side. So they will be presenting themselves to their managers, their bosses, as the perfect manager, the perfect employee, and they will not want that mask taken off. They will not want that being exposed. So you, as someone who's working under them or alongside them, this is why documenting things is so important, because what you're doing is you're creating a protection where you could expose them. Because when they're exposed, they are going to want to punish you. They are going to go into a rage. They are going to get vindictive. And you need to be prepared for that possible.
Well, I would say that I do agree with that. And the thing that the narcissist fears the most is being disempowered. And that's the big deal, isn't it, for a narcissist? They feel like they have to hold the power, and disempowering them will be the thing that is the most uncomfortable. But I also think the other thing I want to say about this whole dynamic is that it's particularly important. And, you know, I'm very much aware that my other colleagues on this call are coming from their professional point of view. But for me, you've just got to be extra kind to yourself. You've got to look after yourself in this situation, because narcissists try and make you vulnerable, and you are more vulnerable when you're in this situation. Taking good care of yourself is going to be really important at this time.
Yes, I completely agree with that, because they don't want you to look after yourself. They want to consume everything you have. They want to take your energy. They want to take credit for your work. They want to leave you depleted. Mm-hmm. And you need to, whether it's walking in nature, looking at pictures of nature, whatever it is, speaking to a coach, you must prioritize your well-being over this 100%.
So, wrapping it all up, what I got from our conversation, it's all about being self-aware, putting boundaries in place, learning to respect oneself, self-love, self-respect, and being in communication with others, being in communication with nature, because there is a way out. Even by sharing, I think that people feel gotten. So if, I'm talking to you, that you're listening on the other side, if this is you, we get you. We understand what's going on. We get that. So from my point of view, I just want to thank you for joining us today. Nick, Zoe, Lizzie, I'm so grateful for your friendship and for being here on the call. I know that we're doing this because we are providing a service to others, but I thank you for your contributions. Great. So on that note, I just want to thank you once more for joining me for a coffee talk. Exciting, isn't it? That was a really great session. I want to thank you for listening, and I see you again soon. Bye for now.